Let's take you back to a story that started unfolding in earnest in the last 2 weeks or so. This has to do with the 13.5 billion rand in crucial funding temporarily frozen for 69 municipalities. Well, Parliament's oversight body is stepping in. That is the Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs Committee. Let's bring in the chairperson of that committee, Dr. Zweli Mkhize. Good evening, and thank you for your time. It's a conversation we've been trying to align for the last few days, and I'm glad that we're finally having it. So, on Friday last week, you bring everyone in the same room. You had the Finance Minister, the Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs Minister, FFC, SALGA, the MECs from the 9 provinces. What was the objective of that meeting, and did it achieve that objective?
The meeting was a very important meeting from the point of view of ensuring that there is accountability. The committees that were brought together, those that are involved in the supervision of municipalities or supervision of the appropriations or the public accounts committee. So what we wanted to do is to first express the fact that Parliament is concerned about service delivery, and that communities must not be compromised in any way in terms of receiving the resources that are necessary to improve their lives. And so when the Parliament learned that the Minister of Finance and Treasury had decided to withhold some of the allocation, the equitable share, we then wanted to get more details about this. We do agree that, in fact, they had to act because in the absence of actions, there is no accountability, and that the situation of bad financial management, poor audit outcomes has been allowed to drag on for too long. We need at some point to draw a line to say the buck stops here. So that was why we're at this meeting. We needed the ministers, to explain how they were getting the communities protected in the process of ensuring that there's accountability and that there's proper financial management in the municipalities.
So you say that a line had to be drawn in the sand, given the dire state of financial management in municipalities. But are you, speaking for yourself as a committee, we'll get to the views of the likes of the Financial and Fiscal Commission, for example, in a moment. But speaking for yourself as chairperson, as well as your committee, are you comfortable that National Treasury drew the line at the appropriate point? Because there's this debate that is ensuing about the legality, the constitutionality of withholding the equitable share.
From our experience in the past 2 years, we've actually been noticing the same issue that the Treasury is raising. Issues of unfunded budgets, issues of not paying creditors within the time. And so we found that some of the third-party payments were not done. So, people had provident funds and pension funds being owed, and yet government is supposed to have paid them. And that we had, improper action in terms of unauthorized, irregular, fruitless expenditure, not enough investigation, not enough accountability, not enough consequence management. So somebody had to act. So we believe that the Treasury did need to act. And in fact, to prove that they had to act, the original number was about 99 that were defaulting. But when they put them on terms, then the number started coming down. So they started attending to the issues that Treasury had raised. So we do agree that they should have acted. Yes, we do agree as well that the communities have to be protected, and Treasury must do things within the law, and that they must also use the proper instruments in terms of the Constitution. So there had to be action, but we also want to make sure that while that's happening, all of those who are involved in municipalities and Treasury, communities must be protected. We want to see services being funded in the community. So they must sort their issues out and make sure that the money ultimately gets to the community.
I think, Dr. Mkhize, that National Treasury and other stakeholders have to act is common cause. The levels of concern are shared amongst many, if not all, stakeholders in the local government sphere. I guess the question I'm asking is, doesn't withholding the equitable share go against the letter and spirit, for example, of Section 214 of the Constitution, as well as the Division of Revenue formulae, as well as Division of Revenue Act that Parliament passes every year? How do you justify that? What separates, for instance, this equitable share from a conditional grant, which can be withheld if it's not being spent properly, as opposed to something that, in the words of the Financial and Fiscal Commission, is an unconditional grant?
Yes, the starting point. The starting point is that from the point of view of the committees, we needed everyone to use the instruments that they have within their mandate to ensure that there's accountability. Then there was a debate that was raised by the Financial and Fiscal Commission whether in fact they've gone about it the right way. We had picked that issue up as Parliament and therefore asked for the parliamentary legal team to get involved in separating the matters, because it ultimately is a matter for Parliament to decide as to whether they can withhold or whether they cannot withhold. But that would have needed that as Parliament, we would have then had to sit down and go through that discussion. At the time at which this happened, we had actually not looked at the aspect of the query that was raised by the FFC. We had looked at the question of what is the Treasury doing to shorten the period with which there would have been any form of interruption of finances to the municipalities, and whether in fact there was a justification for any action from their side, and whether in fact the municipalities were themselves responding. And in the case where there's poverty, there's non-viable municipalities, is COGTA, is Treasury doing everything at provincial and national level to support municipalities that could not solve the problem on their own?
I do want to end it with a point that you have raised quite a number of times during our conversation, the protection of vulnerable communities as far as the services that they need. Did you get that assurance from National Treasury, and how exactly do they plan to achieve that and to shorten the period of the interruption of this equitable share?
Yes, we did get that assurance. Firstly, that the number had declined from 99. By the time we discussed, it was no longer 69 municipalities that had equitable share withheld. The number had gone down by 42 additional municipalities, but they'd already showed a plan of how they will assist all of them where there's partial withholding and where there's going to be support given to the municipalities. As far as we are concerned, they should be able to get all the municipalities assisted whilst we ensure that they've all complied with the minimum requirement for showing accountability by municipalities, such as writing letters to confirm that the mayors will not support unfunded budgets, such as showing that in the next 2 to 3 months, they would have dealt with about 25% of unauthorized regular expenditure. So there's already indication that the COGTA and Treasury are assisting the poor ones, the ones that have got problems of poor rate base and therefore are not able to work on their own to generate adequate revenue. So we believe that there's assistance given to them.
All right, let's leave it there for this evening. Thank you for your time. That is the Chairperson of Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, Dr. Zweli Mkhize.